Here's a puzzle, right? It feels like it's right at the heart of modern life. We are, arguably more connected than any humans ever.
Absolutely. Instant information, huge online network.
I can hear people across the globe, like right now. Yeah. For so many of us, millions really, there's this growing feeling of being isolated, lonely. And it's not just, feeling a bit down sometimes. It's being called a genuine epidemic, affecting everyone, all ages, all over.
It really is global.
Yeah.
And it's not trivial, this feeling. It has real costs.
Yeah, the material you shared, it paints a really clear picture. Serious personal costs, societal costs. It hits our health, how we perform at work, just our general sense of, well, being okay.
Exactly.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, right? Take all this material and really unpack it, trying to figure out why this paradox exists, all this connection, yet all this isolation. Dig into the impacts, the real-world stuff, and crucially, explore what we can actually do. What does the research, the stories suggest about building real, genuine connection when we're soaked in digital interaction?
That paradox you started with, that's really the core of it, isn't it? We have these amazing tools, supposedly for connection.
Right.
But the actual experience for so many people is, well, the opposite. It feels completely counterintuitive, and that's what the material helps us kind of dissect. It goes beyond just the feeling, looks at the data, the actual human stories behind this global issue.
And the scale of it? It feels maybe bigger than a lot of us think. It's not just one specific group feeling this.
No, it's incredibly widespread. Now, we do need to be a bit careful comparing specific numbers over decades. Older studies sometimes measured things differently, so saying loneliness increased by X% since the 70s can be tricky.
Okay, methodological differences. Makes sense.
But the overall agreement, the consensus across recent research, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
The feeling of loneliness is just. It's incredibly common today. Studies are suggesting that in lots of developed countries, you're looking at over 40% of adults saying they experience loneliness.
40%? That's wow.
It's a huge number. And it's not just a feeling people report. There's also data showing, a measurable drop in the number of close confidants people have, the people you feel you can really talk to deeply. Over the last few decades, that average number has gone down.
So fewer really close friends for many people.
It seems that way. The core relationships might be shrinking or maybe becoming less deep for some.
And the health side of this. Honestly, it's shocking. This isn't just about feeling sad. It's a major public health thing.
Oh, absolutely. The material lays out some really stark comparisons. Studies are indicating the health risk from persistent loneliness, from weak social ties. It's comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Whoa, 15?
15 cigarettes a day. Just let that sink in. We all know the warnings about smoking, the massive public health campaigns. Well, the risk from being socially isolated is right up there, in the same league.
That's mind-blowing.
And it gets worse. Some research suggests the risk from loneliness is even greater than the risk linked to obesity.
Greater than obesity.
Yeah, so this isn't some minor issue on the fringes. It's profound. Major health implications.
15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
That comparison alone. Everyone should be paying attention to that. What kind of specific health problems are we talking about?
Well, the research links loneliness and poor social connection to a higher chance of developing really serious conditions. Things like cardiovascular disease, so heart problems, issues with blood vessels.
Okay.
It's also linked to cognitive decline and a higher risk of dementia later in life.
Dementia too. Wow.
And maybe less surprising, but just as critical, it's strongly connected to higher rates of depression and anxiety. These aren't just, minor bumps in the road. They're major health challenges that drastically affect quality of life and even how long people live.
And it's not just stats on a page. The material mentioned insights from doctors.
Right.
Like a former U.S. Surgeon General.
Yes, and his perspective is so powerful because it came straight from talking to patients. He mentioned finding loneliness was like this hidden issue, a hidden pathology in so many people he treated. Yeah, it wasn't always the main reason they came in, but it was there, underneath, making their illness worse, making it harder for them to heal. He told these stories that really illustrate it, like an elderly man who kept coming to the hospital seemingly for chronic pain. Okay. But the doctor felt there was something deeper. He sensed the man was also coming, maybe mostly coming, just for human connection because he was so incredibly lonely. The hospital is a place someone would talk to him, check in, just acknowledge him.
So the physical pain was almost like a ticket to get some interaction.
That's exactly how it seemed. And he shared another really poignant one, a middle-aged woman with advanced HIV. When she got really sick, needed urgent care. She had no one to call, no family close by, no close friends she felt she could lean on.
Oh, wow. Facing that alone.
Exactly. A serious health crisis, completely socially isolated. These stories, they put a human face on the data, don't they? Loneliness isn't just a statistic. It's this deeply felt suffering that makes everything else harder, including getting better from physical problems.
And this feeling, this isolation, it follows us into maybe the last place you'd expect.
Yeah.
The workplace.
Right.
I mean, we spend so much time there, often surrounded by colleagues. You'd think that environment would be a buffer against loneliness.
You really would think so. But the material shows that's often not the reality. Workplace loneliness is surprisingly common. Research shows a pretty big percentage of employees feel lonely in their jobs.
Not just junior people either.
Nope, it goes right to the top. Some studies suggest even up to half of CEOs report feeling lonely.
Half of CEOs. Wow.
And look, it's not just about feeling uncomfortable. It has real, tangible, negative effects on the business itself.
What kind of effects are we talking about?
Well, feeling lonely at work is linked to lower task performance. Just harder to focus, harder to feel motivated when you feel disconnected.
Makes sense.
It also dampens creativity. Collaboration, feeling connected, bouncing ideas off people, that sparks innovation. Isolation kind of shuts that down. And on top of that, it actually impairs core executive functions.
But what?
Things like reasoning, problem solving, making decisions. Really critical skills for almost any job, especially in complex roles.
So it's not just a feeling. It directly hits productivity innovation, the bottom line, essentially.
Precisely. And there's another clear link the sources point out. High job stress, which often goes hand in hand with feeling lonely or unsupported, is linked to higher healthcare costs for companies.
Ah, okay.
Right.
Because stressed, lonely employees get sick more often.
That's the connection. More health issues mean more medical claims, higher costs for the company, so you add it all up. Lower performance, less creativity, poorer decision-making, higher healthcare spending. The argument the material makes is pretty clear. Fostering social connection at work. It's not just some soft, fuzzy HR thing.
It's strategic.
It's absolutely a strategic imperative. It directly helps build healthier workforces, more productive ones, more engaged ones. That connection acts like a buffer, helps people handle stress, navigate challenges, and it really helps prevent burnout.
Okay, so the scale and the impact of loneliness, they're undeniable. Health, well-being, even work performance. Which brings us right back to that puzzle, our hyper-connected digital world. If we're online so much, why isn't that fixing it? What does the research actually say about the difference between our online connections and our real-life ones?
Yeah, and this is where some of the most compelling data comes in. It highlights a really stark difference. There are findings from a big Canadian survey, and these were backed up by tons of data from Europe too, that directly compared the impact of real-life social networks versus online networks on our subjective well-being.
Subjective well-being, meaning basically how happy and satisfied we feel with our lives overall.
Exactly. They measured it using standard things like the life ladder, where you rate your life from 0 to 10, worst to best possible. Also general life satisfaction questions, happiness levels, and consistently across these huge data sets, even when controlling for lots of other things, the number of real-life friends someone had. Strongly, significantly linked to higher subjective well-being.
Okay, more real friends equals feeling better about life. That makes intuitive sense. But this is where that surprising comparison came in, right? Comparing the value of friends to, money.
Yes, and it's pretty remarkable stuff. The findings suggested that doubling the number of your real-life friends could boost your subjective well-being by an amount equivalent to a really big jump in income.
How big?
Well, for that life ladder measure, doubling your real friends had a similar positive effect as a 50% increase in household income.
50%? Wow.
For life satisfaction, it was like doubling your income. And for just general happiness, doubling your real friends was comparable to trebling your income.
Trebling your income.
Yeah.
Just by doubling your real friends. That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it? How incredibly important these relationships are. Not just nice extras, but core drivers of happiness, maybe even more than wealth after a certain point.
It really underlines the fundamental human value of connection. And the research also kind of pinpointed where the biggest bang for your buck comes, so to speak. The largest positive jump in well-being often happened when people went from having very few real friends, say less than 10, to having a moderate number, like 10 to 20.
So that initial jump makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, the benefit keeps going up as you add more friends. But moving from a really small circle to a more decent-sized one seems to give the most significant boost to how good you feel about your life.
Okay, so real-life connections are incredibly valuable, demonstrably so. What about all those online networks, the hundreds, maybe thousands of connections we might have on social media?
Yes, and this is where the contrast really shows up. The studies found that the sheer size of people's online social networks was, well, mostly uncorrelated with subjective well.
Uncorrelated, so no real link.
Pretty much. In some analyses, there was actually a slight negative correlation, more online contacts linked to slightly lower well-being, but often these effects weren't statistically significant across the board.
But sometimes negative.
Sometimes, yeah. And when the negative link was significant, the effect was small. Like one analysis suggested doubling your online friends had a small negative impact on well-being, maybe equivalent to about a 10% decrease in income.
So collecting tons of online friends doesn't seem to make us happier, according to this data, and might even slightly detract.
That's what these big studies are suggesting, and it's really important to stress. These results held up even when the researchers factored in loads of other things.
Like what?
Income, age, gender, stress levels, health, how much people exercised, even some personality traits like extroversion. They controlled for all that.
Which suggests it's not just that happier people have more friends anyway.
Exactly. The robust controls imply there's something fundamentally different about the nature and the impact of these two types of networks on how good we feel. It's not just about the person, it's about the type of connection.
This data really pushes you to think about the quality of interaction, doesn't it? Not just the quantity. Which leads nicely into the role of algorithms. The material looked at how we perceive the systems running our online lives and how that links to loneliness.
Yes, that's a really fascinating angle. One study dug into exactly that, how people's feelings about social media algorithms correlated with their loneliness levels, and the key finding. Perceiving those algorithms as insensitive, feeling like the platform just doesn't get you, doesn't understand your interests, isn't showing you stuff that would actually connect you with others meaningfully. That feeling was consistently linked to greater loneliness across all ages.
That makes total sense. If the system feels cold or random, it just makes you feel more alone in the crowd.
Spot on. If you feel like it's just throwing random stuff at you or pushing superficial interactions, it seems to make that feeling of being disconnected even worse.
But there was a twist, right? About age and perceiving algorithms as responsive.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. For younger adults, feeling the algorithm was responsive, like it understood their preferences, helped them find cool content, relevant groups, maybe even people that was linked to lower loneliness.
So for younger people, a smart algorithm can actually help them feel less lonely.
That's what the correlation suggests for that group. It implies that for them, these algorithms might act as useful tools, helping them navigate the huge online world and find connections or content that actually resonates.
Okay, but different for older adults.
Yes, the opposite trend showed up for older adults. For them, perceiving the algorithms as responsive was linked to increased loneliness.
Increased. Why would that be?
Well, the interpretation offered in the material is that for older adults, maybe these responsive online interactions are inadvertently replacing face-to-face connections. The algorithm serves up this curated, seemingly responsive digital interaction.
Like it's scratching an itch, but not really satisfying the need.
Exactly. It might be pulling them away from seeking out real-world social opportunities, or maybe fulfilling some surface-level social needs online in a way that doesn't ultimately address the deeper requirement for actual in-person connection.
That's a really critical difference. A
Yeah.
tool for navigation versus a potential substitute that falls short. And there was something about a feedback loop, too.
Yeah, the material suggests loneliness itself might shape how we see the algorithms. If you're already feeling isolated, you might be more inclined to view the platform's algorithms as less responsive or more insensitive over time.
So feeling lonely makes you see the tech more negatively.
Potentially.
Yeah.
And that perception, in turn, could make your online experience feel more frustrating or isolating, which might just feed back into the loneliness, kind of a cycle. Your internal state colors how you experience the digital world.
And what about just basic engagement, liking, commenting, browsing, those relational maintenance behaviors? Do they help?
They found that doing those things online could play a role in the link between responsive algorithms and lower loneliness for younger adults. So basically, if a younger person felt the algorithm got them and they were actively engaging online, that combination was associated with less loneliness.
Okay, so engagement matters there.
But interestingly, these behaviors didn't really explain the link between feeling the algorithm was insensitive and feeling lonely across all age groups. Which kind of reinforces the idea that just feeling the platform itself is fundamentally uncaring or clumsy in how it connects people is a separate factor driving loneliness, regardless of how much you click around.
So it's not just what we do online, but how we feel about the underlying system facilitating or failing the connection. Which naturally brings up the question, can we ever form truly meaningful connections online, given everything we've just discussed about well-being?
Well, the material doesn't totally write it off. It suggests, yes, it is possible to feel genuinely connected to people online, even without being physically present. But, and this is the big but, the how is absolutely critical. It's not the platform itself, it's how we choose to use it.
Okay, so what's the key then? How do we do it right?
It really boils down to maintaining regular, consistent communication, genuinely sharing experiences, sharing emotions, openly, vulnerability, basically, and actively engaging in activities together virtually, things that go beyond just passively scrolling through feeds.
Like what kind of activities?
Think about online book clubs where you actually discuss the book, gaming sessions where you're talking and strategizing together on voice chat, maybe virtual coffee dates where you properly catch up, or even sharing personal wins and struggles authentically within private online groups.
So again, it comes back to quality, not quantity.
Yeah.
Depth, not just breadth.
Exactly that. The material keeps hammering this point. Prioritize the quality of the communication over just racking up contacts. It's about making the effort to have deeper conversations, moving past the surface level stuff, the likes, the quick comments, to actually understand someone and feel understood yourself, even if it's through a screen. Technology can be a bridge, especially for distance or finding niche communities, but it demands conscious effort to use it for real connection, not just passive consumption or performing a curated version of yourself.
We touched on workplace loneliness earlier, but the material really circles back to it, framing it as this really significant space for modern loneliness, but also, importantly, a key place where we can build connections.
It does, and it positions the workplace as one of the most vital institutions we have, right up there with families, maybe community groups, that has to be part of fixing this loneliness epidemic.
Why the workplace specifically?
Well, partly just because we spend so much of our adult lives there,
Right.
but also several big societal shifts have kind of amplified the importance of work connections.
Like the things you mentioned before, people moving around more, living alone.
Precisely. More geographic mobility means lots of people live far from their childhood friends, their extended family, so those traditional support networks aren't always there day to day.
Right.
The rise in single-person households also means home might not provide that automatic daily social interaction. And then there's how work itself has changed more remote work, the gig economy. These offer flexibility, sure, but they can cut down on those spontaneous water cooler moments, the informal chats that build rapport.
And even if you are in a physical office, the material said you can still feel isolated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just being in the same building doesn't automatically mean connection. Think about it, in many offices, people spend hours staring at screens, deep in their own tasks, meetings, often super structured, totally task-focused, no room for just human interaction.
You can be surrounded by people, but still feel alone at your desk.
Exactly. You're physically present, but socially cut off.
This is where those personal stories you mentioned earlier really hit home. Hearing people's actual experiences just makes the data feel so much more real.
They really do. The material gathered these compelling stories from different countries, showing this isn't just a Western thing, it's universal. Like the journalist who got laid off, she talked so movingly about missing the newsroom buzz, that camaraderie.
Yeah.
She contrasted it with working alone from home, saying, you just don't have that camaraderie when you're sitting at home and it's just you, the laptop, daytime TV, and the dogs. I mean, that paints such a vivid picture, doesn't it? The loss of that connection work provided.
Oh man, that line. Just you, the laptop, daytime TV, and the dogs. Anyone who's worked remotely or lost a job can probably relate to that feeling.
Totally. Then there's the banker. He formed this really lasting friendship with a colleague during some crazy high-pressure project, a massive PowerPoint deck, tight deadline, the intensity, relying on each other, supporting each other. It forged this bond that went way beyond the project. He said something like, empathy is very powerful and every business is personal. Shows that even in stressful jobs, connection can happen and it matters.
Yeah, shared struggle can be a powerful glue sometimes.
Definitely. And another story from a consultant highlighted how crucial support networks at work are. She talked about a male friend from a previous job who really helped her career by being open about salary info, which empowered her negotiations.
That's great.
She made a point about how it challenged stereotypes, showing men and women colleagues can be friends, can have each other's back, and can help each other rise through the ranks together. It really speaks to the power of that collegial support for growth and well-being.
Those kinds of real supportive work relationships are just invaluable.
And there was an analyst who moved for a job, knew nobody. Initially, she really leaned on one colleague, her first work friend there. But when that friend moved away, she had to consciously make an effort, reach out, build new connections. It shows it takes ongoing work, right? Especially when things change.
You have to keep tending the garden, so to speak.
Someone else shared how deeply cared for they felt when their mother died. Colleagues didn't just offer condolences. They called, they hugged, they shared their own stories of family loss. It created this space for shared grief, real empathy.
Those moments where you share vulnerability, they build incredibly strong bonds. Shows work relationships can be much more than just transactional.
And it's not just about being in the same physical space either. The material had examples of remote teams finding ways to connect, like a fitness challenge where remote people join walks via video call, or a manager sending cupcakes to a remote employee's home to celebrate good news. Little things, but intentional efforts to bridge the distance.
That takes conscious effort from leadership.
It does, and there was a powerful story from someone who left a really toxic workplace, felt totally isolated, uncared for. Finding a new job with an open-door policy, real camaraderie. They felt immense relief, like they finally belonged, were valued as a person.
That really underscores how critical the workplace culture is. Toxicity breeds isolation.
Yeah.
Support fosters connection.
Absolutely. And one last memorable one. Someone forged this deep, lasting friendship with a colleague while they were stuck working late together during Hurricane Irene in New York. The shared experience, the minor crisis, having to rely on each other, it cemented a bond that might have stayed superficial otherwise. All these stories from all over, they just hammer home. Connection isn't just proximity. It's shared experience, mutual support, vulnerability, feeling seen as a human.
And while loneliness clearly affects lots of different people, the material really singles out one generation that seems to be feeling it particularly intensely, Gen Z.
Yeah, the research is pretty striking on this. Gen Z, basically, kids born from the late 90s onwards, they consistently report the highest levels of loneliness compared to older generations. Some surveys show huge majorities, like around 80%, saying they've felt lonely in the past year.
80%. That's incredibly high. What's driving that for them specifically?
It seems to be a mix of things, all interconnected. Social media is definitely part of the story, but it's complex. Yes, it offers connection, but it also massively amplifies feelings of inadequacy.
The comparison trap.
Exactly. Gen Z grew up swimming in curated highlight reels, influencer culture, constantly comparing their own messy lives to these idealized online versions. It can easily lead to feeling like you're falling short, like everyone else is having a better, more connected time.
So it's not just using social media, it's the pressure and the constant comparison it creates.
Right. But it's definitely not just social media. Big societal and economic pressures are hitting this generation hard, too. Huge academic stress, worries about student debt, anxiety about climate change, global instability, financial precariousness, difficulty hitting traditional milestones like buying a house. All these external pressures create this background hum of anxiety and uncertainty that can feed into feeling isolated or disconnected.
So external worries piling onto internal feelings.
Yeah. And internal factors matter too, like low self-esteem, social anxiety. These are noted as significant contributors for Gen Z. And while being single impacts loneliness across ages, the material pointed out it seems to hit young men in Gen Z particularly hard compared to young women. That's an interesting demographic point. Plus, societal expectations seem to weigh really heavily on this generation. Pressure to conform, achieve certain things, and feeling like you're not meeting those expectations can definitely worsen feelings of being alone or out of step.
And this has massive implications for businesses, right?
Right.
How they market to Gen Z, how they design workplaces for them.
Oh, absolutely. Businesses need to understand this. Gen Z isn't just buying products. They're looking for authenticity, for understanding, for a sense of belonging. Marketing needs to feel less polished, more real. Brands that embrace imperfection, show genuine values, encourage user content, those resonate more. They want connection with brands that feel, well, human.
And inside the company, as employees.
To attract and keep Gen Z talent, Companies have to prioritize cultures that are genuinely supportive, collaborative, focused on well-being. They value mentorship, teamwork, feeling like part of a community. They need psychological safety, environments where they feel understood and like they belong, not just as a cog in a machine, but as a person.
Yeah.
Their sense of connection is often deeply tied to their work environment.
Okay, so we've got a really clear sense of the problem, the wide-ranging impacts, the tricky role of tech, the specific challenges for different groups like Gen Z. The massive question left is, what can we actually do? How do we get from understanding all this to actually building more connection in our own lives and our workplaces?
Well, the foundation for any solution really circles back to that powerful research on well-being we talked about earlier. The material strongly suggests prioritizing real-life connection is just paramount.
Those studies showing the huge impact on happiness comparable to big income jumps.
Exactly. It wasn't just correlation, it showed a profound positive effect. So despite how easy digital tools are, consciously making time and putting effort into actual in-person interactions with friends, family, loved ones, it seems essential.
Non-negotiable, basically, if feeling good is the goal.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
But the material also brings in this really empowering idea that builds on that. The surprising power of what they call weak ties.
Weak ties, you mean like acquaintances, people you know casually?
Precisely. The research shows that positive interactions, even really brief ones with people we don't know deeply, colleagues you're not close friends with, people at the gym, in a class, even strangers you bump into regularly, these can significantly reduce loneliness and actually boost your happiness and well-being.
Really? That
Yeah.
feels kind of counterintuitive. We're always told to focus on those deep, meaningful friendships.
And those deep friendships are absolutely vital, no question. But these studies show that the weaker ties, the casual connections, they matter much more than we tend to think. The material gives some great examples, like a study in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Participants were just asked to make a simple social connection with the barista. Smile, make eye contact, a couple of friendly words, instead of just being purely transactional. And the people who made that small connection, they reported feeling happier, better mood than those who just focused on efficiency.
Just from a quick chat with the barista.
Yeah. And another one, at an amusement park, people were encouraged to chat with others while waiting in line. Those who socialized reported the wait felt shorter, and they actually had a better overall experience of the park that day.
That's fascinating. It implies every little positive human interaction kind of tops up our well-being tank.
That's exactly their idea. It underscores that all connections contribute something, not just the deep ones. And that's incredibly empowering, I think, because it means you don't have to, completely overhaul your social life or find 10 new best friends overnight. Small, intentional, positive interactions scattered through your day can make a real, measurable difference in feeling less lonely and happier.
Okay, so recognizing the value of both the deep ties and these weaker, casual ties is really key. What are some of the concrete strategies the sources suggest for actually fostering these connections, both in life generally and maybe specifically at work?
Yeah, the material lays out several practical approaches. First, it really emphasizes seeking common interests. Obvious, maybe, but important. Join groups, local clubs, volunteer teams, sports leagues, even online communities based on things you're genuinely passionate about.
Find your tribe.
Basically, it gives you a natural starting point for meeting people you already have something in common with. And crucially, don't just join initiate activities, whether virtual or in person, around those shared interests. Doing something together provides a low-pressure way to bond beyond just talking.
Gives you a built-in reason to hang out and connect.
Exactly. Second strategy, cultivate empathy. And this really focuses on active listening. The material stresses listening isn't just waiting for your turn to talk. It's about truly trying to understand the other person's feelings, their perspective, what's underneath their words, rather than just planning your response while they're still speaking. And expressing genuine compassion, acknowledging struggles, offering support that helps bridge emotional gaps and build trust.
Listening to understand, not just reply. That's so fundamental for any relationship, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, specifically for the workplace, a big strategy they identify is to create opportunities to learn about colleagues' personal lives.
Okay, how does that work without feeling forced?
Yeah, it doesn't mean mandatory TMI sessions. It's about encouraging spaces, formal or informal, where people feel comfortable sharing bits of who they are outside their job title. Could be team building things, casual coffee breaks, or just fostering a culture where it's normal and okay to genuinely ask about someone's weekend, their family, their hobbies.
Seeing the whole person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sharing little anecdotes about life outside work helps colleagues see each other as real people, not just roles.
Yeah.
It builds authentic connection, makes people feel understood beyond just their work output. And the material notes, places that do this well, see real benefits, more engagement, less stress, stronger teams.
Moving beyond just talking shop.
Right. Another key idea is to build understanding of high-quality relationships. The material defines these not just by how long you've known someone, but by things like having meaningful shared experiences and a real give-and-take dynamic.
Mutual support.
Yes. And it stresses these connections are built on positive emotions, love, kindness, compassion, generosity. The sources really push back hard against the idea that these are soft or unprofessional feelings. They point to research showing these positive emotions actually boost performance, resilience, collaboration at work.
So kindness isn't weakness. It actually makes teams stronger.
That's the argument. Explicitly fostering these kinds of positive interactions is seen as really critical.
Okay.
And flowing directly from that is the strategy to encourage helping others and accepting help. Helping someone else, even when maybe you're feeling a bit down or isolated yourself, is a powerful connector. It gives you purpose, a sense of contribution.
Makes you feel useful.
Exactly. But just as important is being willing to accept help when it's offered. Letting others assist you builds connection too. It signals vulnerability, trust, and it lets the other person feel good about being helpful. That story about the doctors working late during residency, perfect example. Working intensely together to help a patient created this deep bond, born directly from that mutual giving and receiving of help under pressure.
Creates that sense of we're in this together.
Precisely. And finally, the material introduces this really neat concept, practicing social fitness.
Social fitness, like going to the social gym.
Kind of. It frames our ability to connect like a muscle. It needs regular exercise to stay strong and resilient. The idea is to consciously choose to be social, even in small ways, to build up your emotional strengths and make yourself less vulnerable to isolation, much like physical exercise builds physical strength.
I like that framing. What kind of exercises are we talking about?
They're often about identifying those moments where you might normally withdraw and intentionally doing the opposite. So instead of avoiding eye contact walking down the hall, you make eye contact and smile. Instead of automatically pulling out your phone when waiting in line, you stay present, maybe strike up a brief chat.
Small choices.
Yeah, like asking a colleague a quick question instead of emailing or just saying hello. That's presented as a fundamental starting point. The material mentions that social fitness training programs have actually shown good results, reducing loneliness, improving well-being, and the effects can spill over into personal life too. It's about intentionally choosing engagement over withdrawal.
Being mindful and proactive about seeking out those little connection moments.
Exactly, making that conscious choice. Now, while there are lots of positive strategies, the material also warns about some workplace approaches that might actually backfire.
Like what? What shouldn't we do?
Well, there's a bit of a critique of things like mandatory fun.
Yeah, yes. Forced team bonding.
Right. And companies that blur the lines too much between work life and personal life. Those perks designed to keep you at the office longer, free food, games, whatever they might seem great. But if they keep you away from your real friends, family, hobbies outside work, they could actually make isolation worse in the long run.
So that cool office ping pong table might actually be stopping you from seeing the people you really connect with.
That's the potential downside argued in the material. There are real concerns about employers kind of encroaching on personal time, making it harder to nurture those vital relationships outside the job. The alternative view offered is actually to encourage healthy disengagement from work.
Disengagement, like encouraging people to switch off.
Yeah. Encourage employees to properly log off, prioritize their personal lives, their hobbies, time with friends and family. Allowing people to build those strong external support networks, the ones the research shows are so key for well-being, might actually be more effective at combating loneliness than trying to make work fulfill all social needs.
That feels like a really important distinction. Supporting people's whole lives, not just their work lives.
It respects that people are more than just their job titles. And finally, just bringing technology back into the solutions picture. The material really frames it as a tool. Yes, the big study showed online networks aren't a substitute for real-life ones for overall happiness, but platforms can be used constructively.
How so?
Things like transparent Q&A channels within a company, virtual town halls, collaborative online project spaces. These can help foster a sense of transparency, belonging, feeling connected to the organization and colleagues, especially in remote or hybrid settings. But the consistent message remains. Technology complements, it doesn't replace. That fundamental human need for real, in-person interaction and its powerful impact on well-being, especially for people who aren't partnered up, that just seems unparalleled in the data presented.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. The big picture seems clear. Despite being incredibly digitally connected, loneliness is a serious, widespread, and costly problem. It hits our health, our happiness, even how well we work.
Mm-hmm. A major challenge of our time.
And while technology gives us amazing tools, the research really screams that robust, real-life relationships, and even just those positive, brief interactions with acquaintances, those weak ties, are fundamentally more important for our well-being, especially maybe for people who don't have a primary romantic partner.
And crucially, tackling this isn't about feeling like there's something wrong with you or that you failed somehow if you feel lonely. It's about recognizing connection is a basic human need, like food or sleep. And our ability to connect is something we can actually work on, like exercising a muscle.
Yeah, that social fitness idea. And the really empowering part is that building connection is doable. It often boils down to those intentional, sometimes really small actions we talked about.
Right. Seeking out shared interests, practicing real empathy, and listening, letting people at work see a bit more of the real you, being willing to help and accept help, and just consciously choosing to engage instead of withdraw in those small daily moments.
Those seem to be the building blocks the material points to.
It's about consciously choosing to weave yourself into the social fabric around you, one thread, one small connection at a time. Recognizing that every interaction, even a brief, friendly one, can add up to a less lonely, more connected life.
So here's a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over today. In this world buzzing with notifications and perfectly curated feeds, what's just one small, conscious step you could take maybe right now, maybe later today, to exercise that social muscle, to nurture a real-life connection, whether that's just a brief, friendly chat with someone you know casually, or maybe a slightly deeper moment with someone closer?